The Jewish siege at Masada was the pinnacle point in the war between the Romans and the Jews, resulting in the mass suicide of 96 Jewish rebels. The mountaintop fortress was under siege by Herod's 10th Legion in 73 BC and lasted over the period of 2 years. Flavius Josephus was a Jewish rebel leader captured by the Romans during the rebellion, who was the only historian that chronicled the events at Masada. Before we launch into our topic, I will explain what happened at the siege of Masada. Masada lies 2.4 kilometers from the Dead Sea on a barren, flat-top, limestone mountain amidst a desolate landscape. You could only enter Masada at 4 points: a treacherous zigzagging trail known as the Serpent Path, the Water Gate, the Western Gate which towers 80 meters above the ground, and the Cistern Gate. As if natural defences weren't enough, the cleared plateau at the top was ringed with a 1,400 meter long wall, standing 6 meters tall. The Roman army arrived at Masada with a force of nearly 10,000 men. The defensive operations at Masada were under the guidance of the Jewish commander Eleazar ben Yair. Eleazar was an important figure in the Jewish revolt and was one of the principal leaders of the Sicarii. When the Romans arrived at Masada in 73 AD, they set up camp and set to work constructing a wall of circumvallation. This was a textbook Roman operation meant to encircle enemy positions. The fortification would ensure that defenders were cut off from the outside world and helped stop attempts at breakout. This impressive defensive wall can be seen in the desert today. The Romans decided that taking the fortress by force would be necessary, since their own supplies would run out long before those of the defenders. The Romans decided to bridge the existing gulf up to the walls with a man-made structure. Day in and day out, the Romans added more and more material to the foundation. Within 2 months, the ramp to the fortress was complete. It measured 220 meters wide at its base, rose 90 meters, and was topped with a 20-meter stone pier nearest the wall. According to archaeologists, this incredible large amount of earth weighed the equivalent of 1.5 times the Empire State Building. It is amazing to imagine that this was accomplished without the use of modern equipment. A 25-meter siege tower was constructed and slowly rolled up the ramp. On arrival to the walls of Masada, the battering ram started to break and smash down the walls. When the Roman ram broke through the first wall, the attackers were faced with the second, hastily erected wall made of alternating layers of wood and earth. This wall proved far more resilient to the battering ram, seemingly absorbing every blow. It was, however, flammable, so the Romans set fire to the timbers. By nightfall, the defences were sufficiently weakened, and the legions made preparations for a full force assault the next day. As the sun arose over Masada on the 3rd of May, the Roman army, known as the 10th Fretensis Legion, stormed through the walls and burst out onto the plateau. But rather than being met by screams and shouts, they were faced with a deafening silence. The complex was filled with bodies of dead Jews. According to the previously mentioned historian, Josephus, Eleazar ben Yair gathered the people and convinced them that an honourable self-inflicted death was preferable to the disgrace of capture and enslavement. The defenders accepted their fate and chose death rather than capture. Since Josephus is the only historian at the time to record the events that happened at Masada, we need to ask the question, how reliable and credible is Flavius Josephus in recording the events of the siege of Masada? In this presentation, I will be assessing this question and making a judgment based on the evidence and knowledge I find. There are many findings that contradict and collaborate with Flavius Josephus' accounts of the siege, one of which is archaeological evidence.
There's a great debate among the scholars as to whether Josephus' account of Masada is reliable or not. But if you come out here with the book open and walk around, it's very easy to see all the things that he talks about.
Josephus writes in the Jewish War that the walls of Masada were 7 furlongs long, which is about 1,300 meters long. And Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yardin, who in 1963 to 1965 excavated Masada, supports these records. This further expresses that the archaeological findings collaborate with Josephus' accounts. This use of a siege tower and battering ram is a noted method used in ancient warfare. This enables us to believe Josephus' accounts of the tower. The scene in which the battering ram couldn't break through the second wall can also be proven by archaeology. Remains of rock and outlines indicate a hastily made wall at Masada, further proving Josephus' accounts of the event. This evidence is plausible and a common truth when a city is under siege. This shows us once again how Flavius Josephus' records corroborate archaeological findings. Historians have also found many contradictions between Josephus' accounts of the event and archaeological findings. This ultimately causes Josephus' loss of credibility. During the siege, the Jews decided to destroy a majority of supplies in preparation for the arrival of the Romans. Josephus says, "They presently laid all they had upon a heap, and set fire to it." This clearly indicates that there was only one large pile of supplies that were burned, but archaeologists have discovered multiple piles and fires whilst excavation in Masada. This ultimately shows that Josephus' accounts is somewhat unreliable, although we can agree that Josephus' misinterpretation of the number of fires and piles within Masada isn't a huge mistake, but a notable one that could perhaps lower his credibility. Furthermore, the historian alludes to the fact that there were 38 towers on the walls of Masada, whereas only 27 were identified during the excavations, and once again reveals the reliability of Josephus and his primary accounts on the siege. However, although some of the evidence does not match Josephus' accounts, differing factors such as textual error or even due to translation process faults could have led to an inconsistency in the recordings of archaeological evidence. Although this may be the case, the contradictions within archaeological evidence and Josephus' accounts provide cause to label his accounts as unreliable and untrustworthy. Furthermore, we can see many inconsistencies within Josephus' recount on Roman traditional warfare and Jewish religion that suggest an unreliable streak within Josephus' account. Dr. Candida Moss finds an inconsistency within Flavius Josephus' accounts of the siege. She states,
"The problem with Josephus' story is it doesn't really make a lot of sense. For example, he says that the Romans retreated after they had breached the walls. Why would they do that when they could just push forward and conquer then and there? It seems very unlikely that the Romans would have behaved like this."
Typically, the Roman army wouldn't wait till morning to attack, so why would the Romans retreat this time? They had breached the wall but waited until the next day. A possible reason could be due to the exhaustion of the troops, but this is unlikely, as the majority of the wars and fights fought by the troops lasted many days, sometimes months. This inconsistency within Josephus' recount causes much question on his reliability. Not only this, but the inconsistencies found on the mass suicide go against Jewish beliefs. Josephus tells us in his recount how Eleazar ben Yair gathered all the people and gave this passionate speech convincing them of the unavoidable fate and to choose death rather than capture.
But we cannot be slaves! No. We cannot see our families tortured and cut into pieces!
Dr. Candida Moss finds many inconsistencies within this recount. She points out the fact that getting everyone together wouldn't work.
Nor do we have any kind of corroborating evidence about sort of everyone being in one place. It doesn't seem like they would fit in one place. And it doesn't seem like there would have been time for a very organized speech, a gathering of everyone together, and a very sort of comprehensive suicide pact.
This alone provides sufficient evidence of inconsistencies within Josephus' records, but the most compelling aspect of the story is that for devout Jews of all traditions, suicide is considered a crime against God. Professor Shimon Gibson states,
Judaism, suicide is not regarded as a viable option. If these are God-fearing people, as we understand from the evidence from the synagogue with the scrolls and so forth, yes, taking into account that they're not just the Sicarii but zealots and other refugees all grouped together in Masada, there would have been a discussion there, and I'm sure some of them would have disagreed with the notion of a suicide pact.
This further shows the inconsistencies within Josephus' accounts. Not only were there no room or time to gather everyone together to hold a meeting, but Jewish belief would suggest that suicide wouldn't be an option. However, there is still a small chance that performing such an act would ultimately save the people from slaughter, slavery, and rape for the woman. These inconsistencies help us determine the reliability and credibility of Flavius Josephus in his accounts of the siege of Masada. To conclude, the credibility of Josephus' recount of Masada has been a debated topic amongst historians due to the influencing factors such as opposing collaboration with archaeological evidence and inconsistencies within Jewish and Roman cultures. These, however, do not undermine the great achievements Josephus has made in documenting the siege at Masada and his strive for historical accuracy. Josephus stated himself that he was not one to betray the Jews, proving that he did not show any bias towards the Romans or the Jews. The archaeological evidence found by Yahya have both confirmed and contradicted Josephus' descriptions. This evidence has been able to provide a considerable amount of assistance in them to identify, localize, and interpret the places discussed in the city. However, historians have kept in mind possible factors that could lead to inconsistencies, including translation faults, Jewish religion, and Roman warfare techniques. Not only did Josephus' recount of Masada give us a close insight into the events that occurred in 73 BC, but his writings give us information regarding his society and his context of life. Therefore, Josephus' documents regarding the siege at Masada are reliable, as they are an accurate primary source giving insight not only on the mountaintop siege, but also customary life in southern Israel.